Jeff, you're good to go.
Oh, I didn't hear a ding though. I thought it was going to be like a boxing match or something when I'd hear that bell go off. Welcome everybody. Thank you very much, San Francisco Art Artists Alumni Group, for putting all this together. This is great. These have been fun to hear everybody and talk to each other. So, welcome everyone. Everyone who is joining now, we should probably warn you that you do probably need to turn up your volume to hear us, and we'll probably warn you again. It's my pleasure. I am. Some of you may not know, but I was the longtime librarian at the San Francisco Art Institute, and work with the SFAI Legacy Foundation and Archive with Becky Alexander, who's doing all the tech support for us today. And we are with Bruce McGaw, who taught at the Art Institute for, God, maybe 60 years. So, he may be one of the longest teaching professors of any college or university in the world ever. He's up there. He may be right at the top when you think about it. But we are in his studio in Richmond, California, which Bruce built by hand in the 1980s. And if you can see the light in here, which is kind of fabulous, you'll note that it sort of is designed a little bit, I believe, and you can fill me in, off of experiences that you had in other studios.
Oh, sure. I thought Studio 13 was a marvelous studio. And before I built this one, I went to the Art Institute and took pictures of Studio 13 so that I would have a clear idea of what it looked like.
It really does have that feel to it. I mean, that light this morning when we walked in, thank God, daylight savings times ended, but it is trickling in here with these. You can see those windows that are up high like they are in 13. Let's start. Well, I studied a lot of history, and I do things in this chronological order, Bruce. So maybe we should start with what got you initially to art school and your upbringing in the Bay Area.
Well, I seemed to always be interested in drawing. My parents were fairly devout, and I was obliged to go to church with them. And I would often sit in the church while the pastor was speaking and draw pictures, some of which he found after the service and would hang up on the church bulletin board. And my mother got me into a summer art class one time. I don't remember what year it was or how old I was. I don't even remember much about the class, but I know I was in it. And then toward the end of my high school years, the art teacher I had suggested that I apply for a scholarship to California College of Arts and Crafts, which I did. And I got a full boat scholarship the first year. But after that, I continued to get full boat scholarships for 2 more years, which helped out my family a lot.
Who were your first teachers at CCAC that were influential with you?
Carol Purdy.
Huh?
She was actually a commercial artist, but she was a wonderful teacher. And one of the things that I learned from her was one of the first lessons that I had in perspective.
And other students that you were with at CCAC?
Oh, there were a lot. Manuel Neary was a very close friend. A fellow named Henry Vierm. One of the teachers that we had in a design class, always, when he called the roll, he'd say, Henry Villermy, but it's a French name. It's pronounced Vierm.
Maybe we should show some of the slide deck, because it has some vintage photographs of different. We'll share Becky's screen. Now, the first image here is a little late. It's after as you're beginning to teach at the Art Institute.
Right, right.
Yeah.
This was a class called Form and Color. I always called it Color and Composition, but the actual title of it was Form and Color. And a lot of students who took that class remembered it they were very appreciative of what I had done in that class.
Okay, now one person that was at CCAC that was important to you was Richard Diebenkorn, right?
Absolutely.
Somebody's calling in with a question. Maybe that's Carol Purdy now.
No, I doubt it. I don't know what this is.
The alert. Power is out for a portion of the main campus.
Uh-oh.
Estimate restoration at 11:50 a.m.
Uh-oh, it sounds like some power is out at the camp. Are you still teaching somewhere that we don't know about?
No, not at all.
Okay, so the next slide, I think, shows some images, some sketches that Diebenkorn did. Did he do these when you were a student?
No, much later.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
No, you didn't change much.
In fact, I have that drawing.
You have that one?
I actually own that drawing.
Yeah. It's obviously you.
Uh-huh.
And so, okay, if you go back in those, Becky, okay, so what is he doing with these three different drawings?
Just drawing.
So that's his initial drawing, and then he starts it again?
I guess so. I don't have any idea. I don't remember
And
that.
each time it's more elaborate.
I don't remember him making them.
Really?
Yeah.
Would you go when a lot of people had different drawing groups that they were with? Did you ever go and draw with?
I had a group that met in my own studio in Albany for a number of years. And I later on would go to a drawing session at Julius Satofsky's studio.
The one down in South of Market.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Al Light's former wife, Jill Light, was in that class, that group. And I can't remember, what was the fellow that worked at Lander? Jim Grouden.
Oh, yeah, Jim Grouden, yeah.
Jim Grouden,
Yeah.
a sculptor, he was in that group.
Yeah.
Julius and myself, so the four of us, Jill, Jim, Julius, and me.
Yeah.
And that was wonderful. We did that for years.
Okay, now, and then you started to show pretty early in the night, as soon as you got out of school.
Yeah, more or less.
Like this one shows, this is an exhibition that you and Manuel had, and that's Manuel.
Manuel Neary. And this is at the Sixth Gallery, and the painting on the right is one that I did at Arts and Crafts. And that weird white structure behind the two of us is a sculpture by Manuel Neary. This was about 1956 or 7.
So this was after Allen Ginsberg had first read Howl at
which he read at this gallery.
At that gallery. And Manuel was there that night, from a story you told me.
Yes, he was.
And what did he tell you about?
Well, and in fact, one of the other interesting things about that reading, which became so historically important, was that Fred Martin had an exhibition in that gallery that night of that reading. Anyway, Manuel came to me and he said, I heard a wonderful poetry reading last week, and it's going to be given again at the Telegraph Hill Neighborhood Center, and we should go. And so we went, and it was wonderful. And we saw a guy who was running a tape recorder. And I said, Manuel, we should get that and we could take the tape and play it at the school.
What?
And we went over and introduced ourselves to the fellow running the tape recorder, who turned out to be Philip Whalen, a notable San Francisco poet in his own right, Buddhist monk, and a wonderful guy. And a few weeks after that, after teaching my class at the Art Institute, I stopped at City Lights bookstore, and I found a small poetry magazine that had a couple of poems in it by Philip Whalen, which I bought. And then, since I had nothing else to do, I wandered up, I don't remember the street, but the coffee shop was on, and other interesting things in the Italian district of North Beach. And I went into a bar called The Place. And Philip Whalen was sitting at a table. I bought a beer, and I went over to the table and I said, "Hey, do you remember me?" And he said, "Yes, of course." And that was how I got to know Philip Whalen better, which our friendship increased over the years.
And he wrote a poem about you and your work, didn't he?
Well, it's roughly about my work.
Yeah.
It's titled North. I can't remember exactly the title, but it starts out with a description of a view that he can see out his window.
What happened to the recording that he did of Ginsberg's reading of Howl? Or did it work out?
He said that we'd have to go to the Poetry Center at San Francisco State and talk with them about it, which we never did.
Well, I hope they kept that one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they did. Okay, I think there's a picture of Howl in this little slide deck. There it is.
I owned a copy of the first edition of Howl, which I still have, and it has scribbles in crayon that my wonderful daughter Caitlin did as a young child.
God, that's a keepsake for sure.
Well,
Caitlin.
it is a keepsake.
Okay, let's see. What's our next picture? Oh, okay. This prompted me. I wanted to make sure that you saw this painting that you did of books from probably the 1950s, but you can elaborate. But I wanted you to talk about your attachment to books and from this time period.
Well, as a matter of fact, there's an interesting story. I think it's interesting. In around 1956, I was working in a bookstore in Berkeley, at one of the textbook stores on Bancroft Avenue, outside of the UC campus. And one day, Bill Brown, later come to be known as Theophilus Brown, he came in and he saw me and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm working here. This is my job." And he said, "Why aren't you teaching at the school?" And by the school, of course, he meant the Art Institute, because at that point in time, all across the United States, if you mentioned the school, everybody recognized it as the San Francisco Art Institute. And I said, "Well, it never occurred to me." And he said, "Well, go over and check it out," which I did. I went over and I looked up Elmer Bischoff, and I told him exactly that story. And he said, "Well, we should go see the director." And the director at that time was Gurdon Woods, who was a really wonderful man. And we had a conversation with Gurdon, and he said, "Well, write up a class outline and come back and see me again." So I did that, and I got a job. I still had to work in bookstores because the amount of salary that I was making from teaching one class at SFAI was not sufficient. So for many years after that, I continued to work at bookstores and teach at Arts and teach at SFAI also.
And I think the next image shows you teaching. and you're teaching in the library, of course, which
Right.
was your second home outside of the studio at the school. And you're smoking in the library.
Yeah, which is kind of weird. I don't remember smoking a pipe, although I know I did it because there are some other photographs
Yeah.
of me smoking a pipe.
Yeah.
My dad used to smoke a pipe, and I took that up actually instead of cigarettes.
What was it like in those first years when it was the California School of Fine Arts and thus the school, you know, teaching on Russian Hill there? Like, were there other faculty that were important to you, and working with that set of students that found their way there instead of someplace else?
You know, I can't remember names of students from early on. One or two, but not very many. And
Well, you told me earlier, I think, that you only remembered the names of the problematic students, and so maybe this makes sense. But how about other faculty then too? Because Bischoff was teaching there at that time.
Yes, he was.
Yeah,
And I got to know Elmer fairly well.
and Diebenkorn was teaching.
No,
there.
not yet, not
Not
at
yet?
that time.
Okay.
He came a year or two later.
And would you visit Elmer Bischoff in his studio?
I did once or twice.
Uh-huh.
He was living in the Monkey Block early on.
Uh-huh.
The Monkey Block was in a building called the Montgomery Building. I think that's what it was called, which it was on the site where the Transamerica building is now. It was torn down, although it was a wonderful building, and it was one that had survived the 1906 earthquake. Elmer had a very small studio there.
Uh-huh.
He was just getting a divorce from his second wife, actually.
What's our next picture on there? Oh, some of these paintings from, I think, from the late 50s, early 60s.
Late 50s. At the home I was living in at that time, I was using the dining room of that home as a studio. And this painting was done in that dining room.
It seemed like Elmer, in reading about his work over the years, was always telling students and others to to draw and paint and make art about things that were close to them, that they were attached to. And in looking over some of your paintings recently, a lot of those seem to be that as well. But that seemed to be across the board with so many of people from that era in painting. I mean, was that a distinction of the abstract expressionists, or was that just a through line in some ways?
Oh, I think it was probably just a through line.
Uh-huh.
I mean, de Kooning actually early on did many paintings that were in his own studio, of his own studio.
What do we have next? Oh, another picture of you teaching. And this is at the school.
Right.
And you're emoting.
With the old-fashioned lighting fixtures.
Oh, yeah, yep. How much say-so did you have in those studios and the lighting and those easels and everything else?
How much what?
Well, wouldn't you build some of the equipment that was in those studios?
Not really. There's always been a kind of suggestion that I did that, but no, I didn't. But Julius and I did refinish all the tables in the drawing studio. That the surfaces of the tables in the drawing studios had gotten so scarred and scuffed up that they were lousy. And so we resurfaced them, and that may have created that erroneous idea that I had built them.
Okay, it's good to get this stuff cleared up. What's next, Becky? Okay, self-portraits.
Early on.
Would you encourage your students to do self-portraits?
Not particularly, no.
Okay, what else we got? And this isn't from this studio though.
No, this is a corner of the studio that I built behind my house in Albany.
But it sure seems to have that same light as in here.
It did. It had great windows in it. In fact, one of the stories about building that studio, that I was lifting up one of these large windows, and it still had glass in it. I was trying to save as much of the glass that was in it, and I was hoisting it up with a rope, and the rope broke, and I grabbed onto the window, and I pulled it toward me so that it was sort of caught between me and the wall of the studio, and I hollered out, "Help!" And a fellow 2 houses away from me, Ted Rozak, who became famous shortly after that, he came running over and helped me pull it into the appropriate opening in the studio.
I think Ted Rozak taught at the Art Institute for a little blip.
He may have.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah. Okay, the next image. Another thing close to home and sort of a beautiful still life.
That was just something in my studio.
Look good. Okay, tell us about this painting. What's going on here?
Well, 2 friends of mine. The figure playing the piano was a wonderful pianist named Julian White. My daughter took piano lessons with him, and he was a great friend, wonderful pianist, wonderful teacher. And the other figure is a portrait of Philip Whalen, who I mentioned earlier. And if I could show you the book is open to a specific poem of his, in which he talks about having a studio space that was huge. And I always loved that poem.
Maybe we should check in here and make sure is everybody be able to see the images? It seemed like somebody just made a comment that they were having a hard time seeing the images. If people could put in the chat to make sure that people are seeing the slides. And I hope people can. Okay, good.
Yeah, it might be I think Kathy Johnson has a trouble. It might be on your computer that there is a setting you have to hit. But it should be good for everyone else.
Okay.
Thanks.
I became interested in this painting. I had been making some drawings, and in one of the drawings I had the piano actually floating over a mountaintop. And so the two gentlemen were actually also floating over the mountaintop. And then that became a little too, what's the word? Unpoetic. And so I sort of put them in a room, although there's actually no logic to that room. The yellow floor is actually the source of light. The light is coming up from underneath them. And I thought that was a sufficient idea that they were floating.
Okay, let's see what the next painting. Okay, yeah, tell us about this painting.
Well, that's simply a document recording my daughter's first bicycle. And, well, I'm not sure it's her first bicycle, but it was a brand new bicycle that she was very happy with. And that's her younger sister riding out of the picture on the left, followed by the pet dog.
Oh, and that's right here.
No, that was in Albany.
Oh, that's in Albany.
Yeah.
Now, is that your van?
That's the car I had at that time, yeah.
Wow. So did that van restrict how large you could make a painting?
Never thought of it that way.
Okay. Because I think you told me one time that when I asked about when they built the 1969 structure at the Art Institute, why the painting studios were downstairs and what about the light that was so beautiful upstairs. And I think you mentioned the doors downstairs and how that gave people more, you could make bigger paintings.
Well, I guess that was true. I don't remember that conversation, but I guess that was true.
Okay. All right, let's see the next slide. Next painting. Oh, okay. Well, there are those lockers. This is actually for a lot of the alumni to show the patina on the lockers down in the painting studios. And I think your name is written on one of on the right side there. I'm not quite sure what it says. I think it's identifying your spot or your locker that you had down there, your set of lockers or cabinet that you had.
Yeah, I had a couple of them.
Yeah. So you would bring things in for students to, you would bring in setups for students to draw and to paint.
Yes, I would.
Yeah. And that's in one of those painting
That's in
studios. I
one of
can't
those painting
identify it.
studios with me and Franklin Williams, who was quite a character.
Oh, he sure was. He sure is. I mean, he still is a character.
Yeah, he's living up in Sebastopol, I think.
Is he? Yeah. Yeah, I should go cross paths with him. Maybe we should interview him at some point. He would dress as a priest every once in a while.
Yes,
Do you remember that?
Yes, he did. And he would ask his students to confess their sins.
Well, did you ever confess to him?
No.
Okay.
Why would I do that?
But I remember him, there's a photograph of him, I think in the archives of him with a collar on.
Uh-huh.
And he's chuckling, but some student is sitting with him there out in the, outside the cafe. Okay, tell us about this painting. What's going on here?
Oh, I'm kind of proud of that painting. It's here in this studio. And it was made from this house looking out across the San Francisco Bay. And one of the things that I tried to manifest in this painting, across the bay in front of the Tan Mountains, there's a oil tanker. And I was making the contrast between the oil tanker out there in the bay and the traffic on the freeway. And then in the lower right-hand corner, there's a youngster getting a bicycle out of a garage. So often offering an alternative.
And there you are in this studio, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's it. The painting on the left with the fellow at the computer. There's a portrait of Richard Talavera, who is a wonderful playwright and poet. That was another poet friend of mine who I really became very disenchanted with.
Uh-oh.
He was a very interesting young man at that point in time, but he took it upon himself to often come to my house and sort of use it as a home base, and it became very frequently. It was very annoying.
Was this before or after you painted him?
That was before I painted him, and that's why I painted him looking so demonic.
Well, coming into your house.
Yeah.
Ooh. Wow, that's a good one. I'm glad I brought that one up. Okay, now I put this one in here, Bruce, because it's such an iconic thing for me and and it illustrates your every time you would teach, you would come up to the library. And now you wouldn't always grab this Goya title, but you did a lot of times, as you can tell from the checkout card that's on there, because we would always make you sign it out.
Right.
But it was one of the heavier books in the collection.
Well, I loved using the books to show students things. And one of the things I wanted to say, one of the first people I met when I started teaching at the Art Institute was Jim Weeks. And Jim was a wonderful guy and very helpful to me. I remember several times we met in the library and he would pull books out of the shelves and show me certain paintings and talk about them. And that was just wonderful. We became good friends.
Well, in looking at this book, and this is one of the, when we moved the archives to our new location at the Crown Point Press Building, we were trying to select titles that weren't necessarily related to Northern California art, but were important to the education art students there. And this is one we took, and it has all your fingerprints all over it. I mean, it's got, I mean, it really does. I mean, there's no way that you wouldn't be culpable if they did a dusting on this thing, because I mean, and it's not just your fingerprints. I mean, it's, I don't know if you were using charcoal or whatever, but you turn the pages and you think, well, yeah, Bruce must have been really showing this image a lot. But it is a beautiful book. The reproductions in it are really great. So I could understand it being, it probably has the best patina on it of any, you know, any book in the collection. So we thought, okay, well, this is a very appropriate one for the archives, and it'll deserve a vitrine at some point. And we'll put in this checkout card with it. Okay, now it dawned on me recently, and I mentioned this to you earlier today, that you probably saw this fresco by Diego Rivera more than any other artist ever. And I was just curious what you thought of it over the years, if anything changed, and how you might have used it when showing things to students.
Well, I appreciated having that mural there. I wouldn't say it's great art, but it's awfully good art. And I often talked about it to my class and sent them in to look at it and to check out how he had used perspective in that painting. Of course, it's interesting because in the center, at the bottom level, are three figures who were important in the origins of the California School of Fine Arts.
Yeah, they sure are. The one on the left in the green hat is Timothy Pfluger, the architect who brings Rivera to do the mural at the Stock Exchange. And the person in the middle was the board chair, William Gerstle, who funded the thing. And on the right is Arthur Brown, who designed the 1926 building.
In the upper left corner, there's a guy with a pneumatic chisel. And I've always thought of that as the sculptor Stackpole.
Yep.
Who was responsible for various monuments and sculptures in San Francisco.
Yeah. And he was the entree with Rivera, because he had been in Paris in the early part of the 20th century when Rivera was there. There's a photograph of him, of Stackpole, Rivera, and Matisse. And they're hanging around together.
Frida Kahlo and Rivera actually stayed at Stackpole's studio. And another interesting connection is that David Park worked for Stackpole just as a laborer very early on when he first came to San Francisco.
It shows you how short history really is in a lot of ways when you realize that, you know, this is Matisse, Stackpole. Stackpole was friends with him when Matisse came to California. He hangs out with Stackpole, and Park is there as well, I'm sure.
I would suspect so.
All right, now you have to explain. This is one of the objects, one of the curiosities that we brought to the archives, and we're curious of any backstory that this might have.
Oh, well, yeah, there is sort of one. students were often painting on unstretched canvas or on paper. And there was nothing in the studios to mount those papers or canvases on. And so I took it upon myself to, I don't remember if I had to purchase these or if I had them as a consequence of building things myself, but I had a lot of boards, and I took them to the school, and they began to disappear. People would paint on them and then not take the painting off, but leave it on the board and put the board in the paint rack. And so slowly they became unavailable for other people to use. And so I painted on the back of them those words, so that I would have a little control over them. I'm not sure it ended up giving me much more control, but that was my idea.
Is it okay that we have it? Do you want us to return it to you?
Oh, no. That's a hoot.
I think this is the last image, but it's probably one of your last classes that you were there.
I think that was I think that was at 4 o'clock on the last day of that semester, my last semester. And there was a little party out in the hallway. I was unprepared for that, but I was really, what's the word? It was very meaningful to me.
You weren't happy to be walking out of there? It wasn't like good riddance after 60 years.
Oh, no, actually I was not unhappy to make it my final semester there. Things had sort of changed at the school. The administration had gone through a lot of turmoil, and I'd had problems with the administration.
Well, you weren't alone. I'm sure.
No, I'm sure that's true.
In fact, there are a whole lot of questions pertaining to the nuances of a lot of things that we're gonna pass on today. But we'd love to interview you some more and get more oral history of different things pertaining to, not just the school, but your paintings and everything else. Have you drag out some of these paintings? Although I just heard that a lot of your paintings got professionally photographed.
Yeah, my daughter arranged for a professional photographer to come here and take pictures of all the stuff that's in this studio. But that actually leaves out a few pictures that are in other people's hands.
Yeah.
Like there's one in my neighbor's house that we should have brought over at that time. And I just never got around to doing that.
Well, thanks, Bruce. I have a feeling there are going to be some questions that were put into the chat. I saw a bunch of different comments that popped up, a bunch of students from, different eras. I didn't find anybody I don't know if anybody from the 50s replied, but I did see people.
They're probably all dead.
Well, maybe. I mean, you were younger than a lot of those students that you were teaching in the 50s.
We have a question from Annie Reiniger. What year was Bruce's last semester at SFAI?
I wish I could help you out with that answer, Bruce.
God, I don't really know.
7?
Huh?
Okay.
Oh,
So probably 2017 then.
that makes sense.
You were there when I was there in 2014. I'm sure you were still there. So maybe a couple of years after that, right?
Yes.
And then Becky has a question. I think you can take off the sharing maybe so we can see Bruce better. Did your ideas about teaching change over the years, Bruce?
No, I don't think so. I got better at it. I think I had more knowledge and was a little more subtle.
We got a Jeff Magnan, a question about the Diego Rivera mural. Why you think it's very good art, but not great art?
Well, I think great art is a little more imaginative.
I could probably assist with the answer to that question, knowing Bruce all these years. And there are very few things that good art is about as high a compliment as you'll ever get from Bruce about art, I think. I mean, great art has, I don't know, you're a pretty tough critic.
Well, great art is far and in between.
And
We got a message from Shanna, Ireland. Hi, Bruce. Shanna, Ireland here. Thank you for being such a great art teacher. Always really enjoyed your classes and appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
And then we are going to go down. Wendy Stefano knew that it was 2017, your last year. So that was right, Jeff. Mauricio Robalino says, your honesty and vision will always be with me. Thank you. And then I think I just pinned the screen, right, Christine? Is it still a problem? I can try to do it again. There have a question from Jackson. Hi, Jackson. Bruce, would you mind talking about the painting behind you? Is it a variation of your Amaterasu painting?
The painting that's behind me, I presume you're talking about this one.
Yes.
Yeah, well, there's a rather sad story about that. The painting is about a painter working on a painting, which you can see in the upper left corner of that painting. And there's a woman in a red blouse that's sort of bouncing in. And it was meant to be a picture of me and my wife. And she was coming in just to please me. And I was pleased that she was coming in. And the nude figure in the foreground is a goddess who is giving us her blessing. And it was about that time that my wife at that time decided to split. And so it's a, you know, kind of a weird thing to have that determination to be made right at the time when I was feeling so warm and happy with my relationship with my wife. There's actually two of those paintings. One of them is a little further finished than the other. They've never really both been finished because I couldn't bring myself to finish them. The other one's right here.
oh, here.
Maybe we could
Want me
just move away and it can be seen. Can you see it now? Or, yeah, hold it up. That's great. Me, my wife, and the goddess. Whoops, Jeff, if you move that over a little to the left.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I was going to ask you a question about teaching drawing, Bruce, because a good friend of mine who I grew up with went to architecture school at UC Berkeley.
Uh-huh.
And he took a drawing class, and for a short, I don't know how long a time period it was, but you taught drawing to these architects over at UC Berkeley.
I did for 3 years. Oh, they were on the, they were off the calendar. They had a different breakup of the school year. What did they call
They
it?
might have been on a quarter system.
It was on a quarter system.
Yeah.
I taught for 3 successive,
Yeah.
no, not successive quarters, but in 3 different years, I taught a quarter each year. And that was fun. They were interesting guys for the most part.
Well, he was always intrigued by it because, he thought it was such a wonderful change from being with the architecture in the architecture program where it really was doing something that he felt was much more.
Joe Eschrich's daughter, Lisa Eschrich, studied at the Art Institute. And I got to know Joe Eschrich fairly well. And he hired a number of artists to teach in the architecture program because he thought the drawing classes in the architecture program were too much the same. He wanted some that were a little more imaginative.
And he was a really renowned Bay Area architect too.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. We have any other questions that are in there?
Yeah, and I'm also realizing that I'm way too loud because everyone turned their volume up for you. So I'm trying to speak softer. Annie has another question. How did teaching change over the years? Meaning, did the students change? Was there a difference in the 1960s students from the 1970s, 80s, etc.?
Well, one difference that was fairly noticeable is that early on in the late 50s, there were more ex-GIs, particularly after the Vietnam War. There were a number of students who had served in Vietnam. In fact, one day in my painting class, I was having a critique, and the students were sitting on tables looking at the paintings on the wall. And I noticed a couple of guys exchange their glance. And after we had finished the critique, I asked one of them, I said, what was that about? I noticed you guys exchanged the glance. And he said, didn't you hear it? And I said, hear what? And he said, well, a helicopter flew over. And when we were in country, the helicopter was your lifeline. And he said, we both heard it and acknowledged that. And that was really interesting.
There is Christine Wolheim has a couple of questions. I'm going to start with the last one. Who were your biggest influences, Bruce? And you already told us where you studied, but at CCAC, right? And do you feel it's important to go to grad school? So who were your biggest influences? And then do you think it's important to go to grad school?
Well, the single biggest influence I had was Richard Diebenkorn, who became a very good friend of mine. And we remained friends, although we didn't see each other later on as we both aged. He was living down in Southern California, and then he was living up in Northern California, and I very rarely saw him. Although I did see him close to the time he died. But he was a wonderful guy. With regard to grad school, I don't know. I think it depends on the program. I was a visiting artist to a school in Ohio some years ago. And it was a small college, not a very distinguished college, but the art program was wonderful. They had hired a group of wonderful teachers, and the graduate program there was absolutely wonderful.
We got a couple of questions that have to do with like buying artwork. Moira Slattery is asking, Bruce would love to know how to go about buying a piece of your work. And there was another question about, you know, how you did with sales and the career and like that portion of your art career, shows and sales, and how you feel about that.
Recently, and no galleries are handling my work. So anybody who wanted to buy something, or even just to come and look, would have to come to my house. And that's certainly possible, as long as I'm alive.
Okay, sorry, I'm loud again, but there is another question. Could you please tell us when you will be traveling to Europe again, Bruce? That's from James Nix.
About 3 years ago, my daughter and her husband took me to Venice, and we stayed in Venice for 2 weeks in an Airbnb, and that was wonderful. I've always loved Venice. It was one of the first places I ever went when I went to Europe. And after Venice, we went to Florence and spent another 2 weeks in another Airbnb in Florence. And that was a wonderful trip. I'd love to be able to do it, but at this point, flying for long distances is problematic.
Yeah, it's something that I really missed out on because I always wanted to coordinate something with Bruce and going to a couple museums in Europe, and you know I would report back after he told me where to go and what to see, and it was always spectacular. But it would have been nice to have been in those museums, in those spots with him.
That would have been great
Yeah,
fun.
that would have been fun.
Trying to be quiet again, but if possible, could we get your contact information, Bruce? That's from Moira Slattery. Do you have an email, or should they reach out to Jeff?
I have an email. bmcgaw@att.net. No,
Oh.
no. Is that the Gmail? bmcgaw@gmail. No, what is it? Kipper?
Becky will put it she'll put it in the chat. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Do you still have a daily painting practice?
I hate to say it, but no, I'm kind of a slug at this point.
That was a question from Christine Wohlheim again, but there was also Win Di Stefano who was asking what still excites you about painting within your own work or painting in general. Are you still actively painting? You answered that, but are you still excited about painting in general?
Oh, yes, I am. I don't get to museums or galleries much, but I certainly am. I have a lot of books about great art that I look at with some frequency.
That was a question I left out earlier. Sorry about that. Did you feel you were part of the San Francisco figurative movement? And did you feel like a unified community?
I did feel as if I was part of the Bay Area Figurative Movement, although I think I grew out of that. I think the people who were in the Bay Area Figurative Movement early on grew out of it.
Stephen Mangum is asking if you're still available for critiques.
Yeah, and Stephen I hope Stephen still lives in the Bay Area. You could.
Stephen who?
Magnum.
I don't know who that is.
He was a student maybe 7 or 8 years ago, right, Stephen?
Well, I'd certainly be willing to talk with somebody who would contact me and, give me a little idea of what they need.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to catch up with all the questions, but if I missed your questions, and Kathy Johnson and Catherine, I see that you have your hands up, but if you could please just put your question also in the chat, because we have so many people on this call. It gets a little crazy otherwise.
Is it okay to talk now?
Do you have a question?
Well, I was just going to make a make a comment and ask a question. And I remember taking a painting class. I don't know if it was from you, where there was a lot of life models painting. Did you do life modeling painting?
Oh.
Is that the bookstore owner?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. I lost Catherine. Did you hear the question from Kathy?
I'm not hearing the other people when they're
hear yours.
talking. That's really strange.
There was a book available about my art.
Oh.
All right, Catherine.
Yeah, hi Bruce. It's good to hear your voice again. I was there from 82 to 86, and I mostly took Franklin Williams, I think. But yeah, so I'm Mo's daughter, Mo's Books. That's my father. So I grew up in Berkeley. Yeah, I don't know what all bookstores you worked in. I never talked to you about that. What book are you in? Because it seemed like the pages that were shown of the images, it seems like it was from a book. So I was just wondering, because I know John Wong at Mo's Books did buy, or he said he was involved in purchasing a good amount of the library from the Art Institute. Do you know John Wong?
Yeah, we both know John, of course, Katie.
Mhm.
So crucial to Bay Area bibliographic everything. And so
He's been working for us for 50 years. He came to us right out of high school.
yeah,
He's still there. Yeah.
I think the book that we got a lot of those images out of was it was an small exhibition catalog that John Natsoulis did, the Natsoulis Gallery did in Davis.
That was too fast for me to write it down.
It's I can kind of send it to you if you want to get a hold of us, but it's Bruce is going to pull it out in his librarian expertise that he has.
I think I have one.
But it was from the Natsoulis Gallery in Davis.
We're gonna do research on that, and we're also gonna put it in the chat or with the YouTube video. Thanks for asking, Catherine.
We get that to you, Katie.
All right, and I think the other question that Kathy was asking, if Bruce ever was painting from live models.
I did very few paintings from live models.
I heard that, yeah, very few, very few. All right, so we are almost at the end. If you want to put maybe one more question in the chat, it's just easier than the unmuting. That would be great. I see, James, you have your hand up. Can you just put it in the chat?
Bruce is he's like a doppelganger for me. Like he heard about a book. He wanted to go look at a book, so he's
Hello?
That's James.
Yes, here
Yes.
it is.
Yes, my name is James Grouden, and I know Bruce from the Art Institute and Harrington's Bar, of course. And I had a studio down on the waterfront on Pier 3. My wife Fran and I, we're both sculptors, and
James Crowden.
yeah, I'd just like to say hello to Bruce and maybe get in contact.
That's not it, Kate.
Bruce?
Hi, James.
Oh,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine. Mostly fine. A few aches and pains.
Oh, sure.
I think of you often.
Yeah, me too. I often wanted to get in contact with you, and I didn't know how. But
This is his wife, Fran, and we're gonna come see you.
Thanks so much, James and Fran. We put the email in the chat, and I hope you can connect.
Yeah, we'll get you guys.
Enid Brown also says hi, Fran. So I'm really glad we were able to connect a couple of people. And yeah, we're already at the end of the talk. Jeff, do you wanna?
It was really nice to see alumni from so many different decades that were on this Zoom. I saw Linda Lomahofta was a comment that she made and about being one of Bruce's students, and that's just terrific. It's so nice to have the connection that somebody like Bruce brings to the Alumni Association like this. And
Hi, Paul.
oh, good, he can see everybody now.
Yeah.
Eugenie, do you want to stop the recording and then we can unmute everyone and everyone can say hi? I know everyone wants to say hi, but it's going to be a bit of a disaster.